We're demystifying 7 cheap tactics of the Christian social justice warrior. Thanks for joining us in this in-depth training. I'm Cody Leibold. AD Robles, what's your goal today?
Well, my goal today is social justice advocates in the church are very, very good at getting at rhetoric, and you don't want them to get the jump on you. So we're going to take a deep dive into the kinds of tricks of the trade, so to speak, and how to fight back.
So you went into the wild and you discovered 7 tactics in particular. So they are: get the emotional juices going, jump to a generalization and begin building a narrative, insert identity politics and grievance hustling, play tricks with scripture, pull a bait and switch, otherwise known as the Mott and Bailey fallacy, beg the question, and if all else fails, check out of the conversation. So how do these tactics work? We're going to look at each one of them in detail.
Absolutely, yeah, and you know, there's probably more tactics than these, but these are the most common that I've found in the conversations that I've had and the things that I've seen. And so, if you want to understand what's happening, you won't be taken unaware, and these are the consistent ones that you'll see. So let's start with getting the emotional juices going. I think that was the first one. Almost every single social justice conversation that you'll ever have will start with an emotional hook. And what I mean by that is that they want to get you feeling a certain way. They want an emotional state to be created within you where you're feeling a lot of pity and empathy and sadness. And it's kind of a way that they sort of pump the primer a little bit to take you to where they want to take you from an ideas perspective, if that makes sense.
So when you see that, you watch out. It doesn't mean that this is always going to be bad news, but watch out because somebody's about to pull something. And so, okay, they want you to know that his topic is important. And it can border on emotional manipulation. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think so. And again, you know, one of the things that I've noticed about this is that almost everybody does this, and it's not always inappropriate too. I mean, a lot of times the emotional hook is actually something that should create emotions inside of you. Here's an example of what I mean. If you've ever heard a social justice presentation, what it'll start out with typically is a historical story, and it's usually a true story. It's usually a very sad story, and it's about slavery or Jim Crow, you know, different things in the past that we can all agree that were horrible, and they've all sort of made us feel empathy and it made us feel sad, and rightfully so. These are terrible atrocities. These are things that'll turn your stomach, and so there's nothing wrong with feeling that way and caring about the history. But when you see that, and when people start their presentations that way, that's the time to pay attention, because you don't want to let your emotional state rob you of your reason and rob you of your rationality, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So just put up a flag, or just watch out. Watch out. You might be about to be pulled into something where you're going to stop thinking rationally and you're going to start thinking just with your emotions.
Right. I think that the idea is that if they can get you feeling what they're feeling, the idea is that it's easier for them to sort of take you to what they're believing as well. So you're feeling the same things, you've got sort of the same emotions, and it's kind of a short step to get you thinking the same ideas that they're thinking.
So is there necessarily something unethical about doing this kind of strong rhetoric thing?
I don't think so. There's nothing unethical about it, because appealing to emotion is actually a very good strategy when you're trying to be persuasive about anything, even true things. People use it in sales all the time. I mean, you know, there's nothing really wrong with it, but you just need to be aware of what's being done. Like if you ever talk to a good salesman, they'll talk to you about people that, you know, bought their product that were in a very similar situation to you, maybe had a similar lifestyle to you, had the same problems as you, the same pain points you've had. And then they'll talk about how their product was the solution to that. And so there's, I mean, no one's saying that they're lying. They probably did have a customer like that in the past, but they want you to be, what they're doing is they're trying to get you to identify with someone that they've talked to or worked with in the past that had the same problems as you had, and get those emotional juices going. Because if you can feel like, wow, this person really gets me, again, it helps sort of the convincing, if that makes sense. So there's nothing wrong with it necessarily, but it is an effective tactic that you need to watch out for.
So they're trying to move you. That's a sign that something's about to happen. So just watch out. Are they making a reasonable case? Can you understand a reasonable case for the issue that they're making?
Right. And so that is, you know, the key. I mean, when a social justice advocate is moving into the territory of emotions, and you can tell that they're trying to put you in an emotional state, you can go with them there. Just, just be careful, because you can agree that the horrible tragedies of the past were horrible. You can agree that slavery had a negative impact on situations, that Jim Crow laws were evil, things like that. You can agree with all of that stuff. But what you don't want to do is say, because this is what they're trying to get you to do. They're trying to say, see, slavery was wrong, Jim Crow was wrong, therefore welfare and reparations.
Okay,
And
so that's number one.
that's
Emotional juices.
right.
And they're gonna pull you right in, right?
Right. And if they do it effectively, like the way I said it, it's very, it is just kind of extreme, kind of, whiplash kind of thing. But the way that they do it isn't like that. They usually lay out a very, and you can even hear their voices, the emotion, and it's very slick, and it seems to make sense. All this horrible stuff. Therefore, the solution is, reparations or whatever it is. And so, yeah, that's it. That covers number one.
All right. So number two, jump to a generalization and begin building a narrative. Tell me about that one.
Right. So usually this is the second place that they go, because it is usually in this order. So the emotional stuff is first, and then the generalizations is second. So once the social justice advocate has those emotional juices going, they want to lay the groundwork for their narrative. They want to explain the way the world is, and they start to use very, very large generalizations based on a handful, really, of isolated incidents.
So are you thinking about like the case of Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, other tragic and well-known situations in which a black man was killed by the police?
That's a perfect example. I mean, that's not the only thing that they would use, but that is very popular. So, a white officer shoots an unarmed black man in an altercation. So there's been a number of incidents like that have happened. And all of a sudden, this has become the rule. So it's like people. You've probably heard something like this. You've seen the stories about Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, things like that, and all of a sudden, white cops are shooting black people like hotcakes, and they can get away with it every time. And there's packs of them roaming around the street just looking for a black guy that they can shoot. And so that's the idea. So it's like, if you're a police officer and you're white, you're a suspect now. You're part of this problem. If you're a black man and you're involved in a police encounter, well, you should be scared because they might kill you. That's the narrative, but it's actually not true.
Yeah, so it's a narrative, and it's very sweeping, and it's built from a very small number of examples, tragic examples that we should care about, but all of a sudden it's a general rule, and they're presenting it to you as this is just a rule.
Right. I mean, and there's a great political commentator named Larry Elder, and he makes this point. He says, would it be rational if somebody said, well, people get struck by lightning outside all the time. It happens. It just happens. You see the statistics. And so would it be rational for that person to say, well, therefore, every time I step outside, I'm looking over my shoulder for the next lightning bolt? No, that would be irrational, obviously. But the reality is that you're much more likely to be struck and killed by lightning than you are to be killed by a police officer, even if you're black. So, it's a completely irrational fear, but the narrative has been built and the narrative is being believed. And so that's where we're at.
All right. So there's a narrative that, and what's funny about this is sometimes, and it's really tragic, but sometimes the reporters will even say, what matters here is the narrative. Mm-hmm. We may not know all the facts quite yet, but what matters is the narrative. And that reminds me of one of your favorite people, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she says, I would argue that they're missing the forest for the trees. I think there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right. There's actually something to that if you think about what she's saying. It sounds silly in one light, but there is something to it. The narrative does matter. Right.
In other words, we would already know what moral narrative is the true one. And I'm interested in talking about specific facts and details only as long as they're useful for convincing you that I'm right. And this tactic works because people know that history does actually matter, and that in some areas we as Christians have bad history. So oftentimes this is how the argument will go. It's made that the Church of Jesus Christ was complicit in some of the sins of slavery in the United States, and I don't think that's debatable at all. I mean, you'd have to be very dishonest with the facts to say that the church wasn't involved in any of these sins. There were problems within the Church of Christ when it came to slavery, when it came to Jim Crow. Not every church, but there were many churches that were involved themselves with these sorts of sins. And so an example, what they would do would be, okay, these sins were a problem in the past. We're all sad about them. And that's what the church is doing now. So it's a generalization. So it's saying, well, the church did this in the past, and the same thing is going on today. But the problem is that they don't typically prove that it's happening today. So it's just kind of overgeneralizing that the church is guilty of sins, and that they just overgeneralize it to make it useful for their narrative today, if that makes sense.
Okay, so they emotionally manipulated you. They generalized. That's sneaky trick 1 and 2. Pow, pow, back to back. Now, they're not proving that the church is still involved in sin, but they are just saying that it is still involved in sin. So that's one way they build the narrative, and that's the tactic. And here's why this works. No one makes the decision about what's right and wrong based just on summarized reports, facts, tables, statistics. It's based on a story. That's how people think.
Right.
There's a story about who we are, what's right and wrong, what's happening to us as a people, where we're going. Whoever paints the narrative in the most compelling way wins. Mm-hmm. People who are promoting a social justice narrative, they will try to give you some statistics here and there, but to silence you or to get you following them. But if that doesn't work, then they will just change their tack. They will go right back to telling a story.
Right. And this comes up in the conversation when you push back at all. So let's just say we were talking to someone who said that, this is what America is. Black people are shot with impunity. And then you challenge them. You say, yeah, but the statistics don't really bear that. I mean, it does happen. Of course, no one's denying it. But if you look at the statistics, this is not very common. This is a tragedy, and it's unusual though. So it's not what America is all about. So you'll say that, and the facts are on your side there if you say that. And what you'll get in response is, so wait, what are you saying? That Black people are lying about this? That there's you see what I'm saying? Like, so it's they might quote facts to you, but then if you dispute them and you're actually in the right, they'll go right back to saying, oh, another example of white supremacy. You're saying blacks are lying. That's kind of what we're talking about here.
It's a lot of switching of strategies. Kind of ends justify the means type of a situation. And there's selectivity. Selectivity about which facts you're going to consider. That's not an objective approach, but that's what we're seeing.
Right. So, and one of the things, sorry to cut you off, but this just sprung to my mind. There's a lot of selectivity going on in the facts. So in other words, you'll get statistics quoted at you that say that, here's proof of white supremacy. Here's proof of rampant racism. If you look at Black income, it's this amount. If you look at white income, it's higher. Therefore, we live in a white supremacist nation. Well, they leave out a lot of statistics there as well, because whites are not the highest income earners in the United States. It's another ethnicity. So that'd be really weird white supremacy that you wouldn't be supreme as whites, you know what I mean? But they leave that stuff out.
So it's selectivity in the service of a specific goal. And That's going to take us to the next cheap tactic, which is insert identity politics and grievance hustling. So that's where we're going to pick up in part 2 of this free training. Part 2 will arrive in your inbox soon. In the meantime, take one simple action today. Please click that subscribe button on this YouTube channel. That way you will not miss any updates. We'll talk to you tomorrow.